Welcome to the Know Your Legacy podcast. I'm your host, Vipul Basanya, and today's guest is John Levy. John is a behavior scientist who has closely studied the science of adventure, influence, and networking. He's the author of the 2 a.m. Principle and also hosts a private dinner experience called the Influencer Dinner. John, thank you so much for being here.
It's really my pleasure. I think we're going to share a whole lot of super interesting things with your listeners on kind of how to make their life better, more exciting, more fun, or at the very least, hopefully make the relationships in their life better.
Oh, most definitely. You've been up to some crazy stuff, so it'll be interesting to see your insight on life. So I guess, first of all, just for those who may not know, how do you become a behavior scientist?
So I grew up really unpopular. I mean, really unpopular. And I wanted to understand why I couldn't make friends. And so I started reading a lot of science. And eventually I was approached by a well-known neuroscientist by the name of Moran Cerf to do research. And we've been doing research together ever since.
Awesome. So, I mean, what does your day-to-day work look like in terms of like the types of studies that you do or the adventures that you go on?
So a small portion of my time is spent on studies. Most of it's actually spent on consulting work or writing. So I write a ton for different outlets, Inc., Entrepreneur, like all the big business ones, Forbes. And then I spend a lot of time meeting with clients or designing stuff. So my company, Influencers, not only does these secret dinners, but it also does custom experiences. And we spent a ton of time talking to brands, looking at how to really create meaningful connections between them and their customers. The basic premise to everything I do is that anything we want to accomplish in life is a byproduct of two factors. One is who we're connected to, and the second is how much they trust us in that capacity. And so we really look at how to create meaningful connections with the most important people that can impact the quality of your career, your business, your life, and so on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so from that, what do you think is the number one thing that I guess companies or your clients struggle with, or that you're able to help them with?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear you.
So what would you say is one of the number one things that you see across all clients or companies that need your help with?
So we're currently in an era where brands want to connect with customers, and what they're usually doing is throwing some kind of party, hoping they'll get a tweet or a post on Instagram. The problem is that doesn't create a meaningful relationship with anyone. Relationships take time, and they take a mutual investment of effort. And if there's no mutual investment of effort, it's really tough to build a relationship over the long term. So I run this dinner. 12 people are invited. They're not allowed to talk about what they do or even give their last name. They cook dinner together. And when they sit down to eat, everybody gets to guess what everybody else does. And they find out that it's the editor-in-chief of this magazine, a well-known actor, or actress, all these different people. Maybe it's an Olympian or a Nobel laureate. But the point is that all of them have invested effort in the process of preparing the meal and bond. Now, the important factor here is that if a brand were to do this, they would try to impress people with exotic foods and drinks and hire the most famous chef, and it becomes like this white glove experience. But if you really look back at the most memorable moments, the times we built the deepest relationships, it had very little to do with the amount of money that was spent. Chances are you made some of your closest friends getting caught in the rain on a hike or something like that. It's that you kind of had to overcome something together. So if I'm never going to be remembered for anything, I'm totally cool with that. But if anything I do is ever remembered, it's that I got the most important people in our culture to come to my home, cook me dinner, wash my dishes, clean my floors, and thank me for it. And that sounds batshit crazy.
Yeah, most definitely does. So how do you even go about doing something like that? Like, can you talk through the process of how you put the first one together for someone who's introverted or shy or doesn't have the confidence, one of the confident kids in school might have? how do you then get all the influencers to come to your house?
So the first thing to do is, it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. Introverts, you could argue, are much better at creating intimate relationships. They're just not necessarily working at the same scale. Most of the introverts I know have really close, very loving relationships. The extroverts tend to be social butterflies. So that means if you want to be an introvert that's well connected, just focus on smaller experiences that you could bring people together around. You can get to know somebody one-on-one or in a group of 2 or 3, which is something that probably feels very manageable to most introverts, as opposed to the scale that I do things, which is 12 or 40, 60, 100 at a time. And that's what works for me. And beating yourself up for it not working for you is tantamount to being upset at gravity for existing. You just have a certain tendency, and that's completely respectable, and it's probably genetic to a large degree.
Yeah, so you have to find out what you feel comfortable with and work with that. So, I mean,
Now, here's the important thing. It's important to be respectful of what you feel comfortable with and not limit yourself to that, but not feel obligated to do what I do. Right? So when I first started, the idea of hosting a celebrity would have freaked the hell out of me in the early days. I've hosted famous TV show hosts, celebrity actors and actors, like anyone you could imagine. And nowadays it doesn't really faze me, but that's because there was the growth experience. So you have to cut yourself a little bit of slack and let yourself grow with the experience. Every so often I meet people and they're like, oh, if I was just put into this in this situation, I'd do so well. And the answer is no, you wouldn't, because you didn't develop the skill set necessary to get there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You have to go through the process to understand what it takes to become the character who can handle those situations. And so for you, what did it look like in terms of hosting, I guess, the first few dinners, coming from a person who didn't really know that many people, or I'm assuming you weren't that well connected when you were first starting?
In the early days, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
So what was it like the first few dinners?
Yeah.
It was super odd. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd had people over for dinner before, but the level at which I was trying to do it, we didn't have a clear menu. I didn't know what to organize, what I needed to buy, who I should invite. It was all kind of just a mess.
Yeah.
Now I have a staff of like 8 or 9 people that work for me that organize every aspect of it alongside me and take care of all the logistics without me even thinking about it. But I'm 10 years in and over 1,500 guests and 172 dinners, I think. Here, I probably have the number right here. I've done, my next dinner is on Saturday and it will be number 173.
Amazing. Yeah. So it's, I guess it's something that the confidence builds over time. But
the competence builds over time, right? So confidence is kind of overrated in the sense that you could be completely non-competent and incredibly competent. And it's nice somebody has both of them, but I really care about competence.
Yeah, I
want to know that things are getting done right by intelligent people who know how to get them done.
Of course. No, it makes a lot of sense. There's something interesting, actually. Another guest of mine he said, confidence comes from competence. So when you understand how to do something well, you naturally feel, you just show up more confident because you know you have a skill or a talent in that particular area. So I thought that was really good in terms of relating it to what you said. But
I would think that confidence without competence is just arrogance.
Yeah.
Or it's lacking a real connection with reality, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, I'm completely not competent as a professional tennis player, and I'm completely not confident in my ability to do it. If I was confident, I would just be arrogant and stupid.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, are there any particular memories that stand out in terms of some of the dinners that you've hosted, some of the funnier things, or some of the things that you actually learned from?
The funniest things I probably can't share, because when you're with like a group of celebs and something happens, then it's not really that appropriate. Um, I think it's more the touching moments that you can't really plan. So I had a dinner where everybody was going around guessing, and we were all guessing what this one woman does. And the woman next to her said, "You're a lifesaver." And I said, that sounded super weird. And then she went on to say, at the age of 16, I was dying in a hospital from cancer. And I literally saw myself going towards the light. And then I heard your song, and your song pulled me back to life. And you saved my life. And it was a executive at a famous company, and the woman was Laurie Anderson, a famous musician. She was married to Lou Reed until his passing. And it was one of these things that you couldn't have predicted. But that kind of stuff happens quite often, where like one person's hero is the person that they're sitting next to. And I couldn't have predicted it. You can't arrange for that. You can't plan it. I don't know these people ahead of time. So it's more the touching stuff than anything else.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I guess over time, you've probably had a lot of those happen over the 10 years that you've been doing it. So,
Yeah. It happens like every fifth or seventh dinner.
wow. Yeah. So, I mean, for those who are listening right now, what are you able to share some tips on what you found has worked in terms of building deeper connections, building influence, and you know, expanding your circle in that realm?
Wait, can you say it again?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you could just share some insight based on your.
No, I can't.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me?
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Nah, sort of, but go ahead.
Yeah. If you can make out what I'm saying, it's from your experience. If you can share some insight in terms of things that have helped you network and expand your circle.
Sure. So, first of all, I don't view it as networking. And the reason is that if you ask most people what their association to networking is, they'll look disgusted by the experience. They think it is something dirty that you have to do. But if you ask people, oh, do you like meeting new people? They'll say yes. So it's kind of this like funny thing when you recontextualize something. Networking is seen as really self-serving. And if you actually look at research, there's all this funny research about how things spread. And so if, let's say you have a friend who's obese, your probability of obesity increases by 45%. Your friends who don't know the obese person have a 20% increased chance, and their friends have a 5% increased chance. There's all this kind of funny stuff about the virality of running. So if we're both friends and we're on like a social network that promotes running or whatever, and I run for 10 extra minutes, you'll run for like 3 extra minutes or something like that. So we have this effect on one another that can be pretty profound. And if that's the case, and I meet somebody extraordinary, I don't want to be limited to just knowing that person myself. I want my friends to know that person, because if that person's truly extraordinary, I wanted the added benefit of the virality of their behaviors. So if they've got really wonderful values, character, and all that. So my objective isn't just to meet one person or meet 5 people and have me in the middle. It's to connect all the people I meet to each other so that we have massive network density. And when that occurs, what you actually get is a community. So community is a group of people who have a network of connections between them, and usually some kind of content that connects them or defined relationship. So let's say if they all read the Bible, then they're a community of Christians or something like that, right? If they all exercise at a CrossFit gym, it's the CrossFit community. So my objective is to meet extraordinary people and have them meet as many people in my life as possible, because that's only going to have an added benefit to me. Because if I introduce you to somebody and your life gets better, by knowing you, my life will get better too. So I get the secondary value from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So rather than networking, so to speak, you're trying to build relationships and connect other people to make the network a lot more dense. So it's really about adding value, would you say?
Yes and no. It's not just about adding value. It's about curating. I can add value by giving everybody around me $10. Have I added value? Yes. Have I accomplished anything? Probably not. I mean, at the level that we're talking about, each of the people who would receive those $10 would be so marginally happier in their life that it's irrelevant. So it's not just about adding value. It's about understanding the nature of the way we gather and what causes human beings to connect. And if you fundamentally understand that we are community driven, we can't survive alone in the wild, right? Our young are far too fragile when they're born for them to survive by themselves. We require the support of other human beings. And our biology rewards that. There's something weird called the IKEA effect, which states that you disproportionately care about your IKEA furniture because you had to assemble it. Now that's true for humans. It's called the Ben Franklin effect. Ben Franklin, the American politician and thought leader, realized that there was a contentious political rival. And instead of trying to win him over by being nice to him, he asked the man to go out of his way and do him a favor. And after that point, they became friends because we care about. So one of the things I often say is there's a lot of people out there who say, oh, I don't like to ask for favors. I'm self-made. First of all, none of us are self-made. Second of all, ask for favors. People love being a contribution, and it will cause them to like you more. You're missing out on a huge opportunity. I ask for favors not because I need them, but because I want each of us to invest into that relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. So the other thing I was going to ask you as well is from your experience of studying human behavior, I know you've said in the past one of your superpowers is to see patterns. What are the most surprising or interesting patterns you've seen so far in your work?
So first of all of us are really good at seeing patterns. The problem is most of the patterns we see aren't real. So, for example, the pattern you might see is, oh my God, my brother's so annoying. And you'll keep finding evidence for that pattern. That may or may not be real, right? It could just be like your brother likes spending time with you, so he keeps inviting you to cool events, and you're like, oh my God, he's so annoying. So it's very hard to, you may have heard of something called the signal and the noise, or versus the noise, which is what's the real pattern and what's just noise that looks like a pattern. And there are great books on this topic. I'm not an expert at it, but what I can tell you is that I try to build models for understanding what engages people, how to connect with them, what works and what doesn't. And some of the patterns are pretty simple. Like most companies, when they throw an event, the event isn't novel. They try to make up for a bad idea by spending lots of money on it. But at the core, there's no novelty. And human beings are driven to explore and understand based on how novel something is. So if something sounds really wild, like, did you watch the show Westworld?
I've seen some of it, yeah.
All right, so Westworld did this activation where they created a Westworld town, and they hired actors to pretend to be part of the Westworld town, and you could go into it and experience Westworld. When you hear about something like that, would you want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's novel. Like, it's fundamentally different than anything else out there. And that's what draws you in. The difficulty is thinking that novel requires lots of money. You can be incredibly original and creative at a low budget. And the dinners themselves, I mean, they've gone up in cost year over year because I keep using better materials to cook the meal, doing it at nicer places, so the cleaning bill's more, like, it adds up. But in the early days, I was doing these things for like $200. That's crazy considering the people I was hosting. Now it's several multiples on that, but that's neither here nor there. So I'd say the biggest thing is that there's generally a lack of novelty. And that's also true for living an adventurous life. We fundamentally are attracted to or curious about things that stand out and that are different. And most people live in a routine. So there's a pattern, and routines are great. Routines are great if you want to lose weight and exercise. Routines are great if you want to make sure that you spend quality time with people, right? Put in your calendar, routine. But it's not good for feeling engaged with life, right? You need a certain level of novelty.
So how would you say people can inject more novelty into their lives?
Oh, there's a billion different ways. So you can inject novelty by simply going to a part of your city that you've never gone to. You could insert novelty by saying we can never order from the same restaurant twice. You can insert novelty by taking dice and making all of your decisions based on the outcomes of the rolls. I would sometimes go into a restaurant and I'd pick my meals based on pulling a card from a deck. And the suit would be the page of the menu, and the number would be where on the menu it was. And I would eat meals that to this day still disgust me. But it's fundamentally different or novel. It's interesting. And who cares if you have one bad meal over the course of a year?
So it seems like for you, you keep experiences as a priority almost.
So there's a few priorities. One is that, like, in terms of the priorities in my life, is health and wellness, clearly, or making sure that my wife knows that she's loved and cared for and that she's never taken for granted, because that's probably one of the biggest things. So there's a lot of effort put into that kind of stuff. So, and that I honor my clients and all that kind of stuff. But it takes a lot of work to live in a really engaging life. It does. And some people are willing to put in that effort and some people aren't. And so you don't have to go all in, quit your job, travel to some like godforsaken place on the planet and go survive. This isn't like some stupid TV show made on Discovery, whatever, I don't know. But here's the fact that I've learned. And this is opinion, this isn't based on science. The size or scope of our life is defined by our willingness to be uncomfortable. Because fundamentally, living an interesting life requires us to overcome challenges. It requires us to grow. And you can't grow without being uncomfortable. So the life you have is a byproduct of how uncomfortable you're willing to be. Bottom line.
I love that, because it's just about stepping into the unknown to figure out what else is out there, which you can't currently see in your limited, viewpoint or perceptions. Just before we get into the final few questions, what would you say is one of the most uncomfortable situations you've been in?
Oh my God. Definitely not appropriate for a podcast. It was in my teenage years. But let me think. Most uncomfortable. I mean, I've done stupid stuff. I dropped myself off in foreign cities where I don't speak the language, didn't know anybody, didn't have a place to sleep, and either I'd convince strangers to put me up for the night, or I'd sleep on the street. Within 10 seconds of meeting the woman behind the duty-free counter at Stockholm Airport, she quit her job and started traveling with me.
Wow.
I was once crushed by a bull in Pamplona during running of the bulls. That was pretty insane. I had to go to the hospital. I've almost frozen while swimming in Antarctic waters. I've visited all 7 continents over the course of 8 months. I don't know. I've done some stupid stuff that's been really uncomfortable. Yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff is covered in my book. So I wrote a book called The 2 a.m. Principle, where I break down the science of living an adventurous life. So the basic premise is that nothing good happens after 2 a.m. except the most epic experiences of your life. So either you need to just call it, or you can go on and make it extraordinary.
Yeah, you just keep pushing the boundaries to see what else is possible. Just at the time that you think, oh, it's time to go home, that's when I guess the adventure can begin, because then you don't really know where
you can. Most of the time, it's not worth it, I'll be honest. But if you really know what you're doing, you can make it happen. The magic of adventure is often knowing how to call it.
I love that. So just to get into there's a ton more questions we can get into, but just to get into the final few now, because I know we got to wrap up here. But is there anything different you would tell the 18-year-old John looking back at your life now?
Don't go to Pamplona.
Of course.
What else would I tell 18-year-old John? If I could have started the dinners earlier, I think my life would have been that much better. So,
so I get the principle there, I guess, because just to make it applicable to everyone else, is to start connecting with other people sooner.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. So the second thing is, if there's one statement that you could write that goes into a time capsule for generations from now to read, what would that one statement be from everything that you know?
Generations from now? Oh my God, those people are going to be like computer augmented geniuses that'll look at us the way that we look at chimpanzees. It's not like any piece of advice. I would say have mercy on those that aren't computer augmented. They're good creatures and deserving of your pity. And if the machine overlords win, be kind to humanity.
Look after us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I think you touched on this, the final question earlier on, but what's the legacy you want to leave behind?
The legacy. Oh my God. So I don't know if I care that anybody remembers me. I'll be dead. So, but if, as a byproduct of hearing this or reading my book or anything along those lines, people create or refocus on creating deep and meaningful relationships, I'll be happy now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're well on your way to doing that with everything that you've involved yourself in and are giving to the world already. So thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out more about you and your journey and what you're up to, what's the best place for them to do that?
Pornhub. No, I'm kidding. I can be easily found, not on Pornhub, but on the standard web. I'm John, Jon Levy, Levy, TLB, John Levy, TLB. I'm that on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, johnlevytlb.com. I'm super easy to get a hold of. And oh my God, now that I've said that Pornhub thing, I think somebody's going to post something pretending they're going to make it. Do you know what a deep fake is? Somebody's going to make a deep fake of me.
All right, let's end it here before this becomes too explicit. But yeah, no, I appreciate your time. And
well, it's been a pleasure being on your show. Thank you for having me.